I was so struck by your talking about the demise and the extinction of these languages as life is unfolding in the 21st century. But I think I personally am, kind of astounded with globalization of the fermentation and the creativity that is evolving in all sorts of languages. I'm wondering if you have thought about giving birth to or examining the birthing of language.
No, that's interesting.
Because I think it does seem to be happening with the colloquialisms and the idioms.
Of course, language is always changing and developing, and in one sense, okay. Some people say languages never disappear, they change into other languages, okay. So, for example, Latin, supposedly a dead language except for specialist religious use, changed into many other languages. The problem with that is that these micro-languages don't turn into other languages because the societies are completely subsumed or exterminated. And we heard, I think the speech at the beginning in a click language from South Africa is an amazing summation of the process of language death, because the man speaking, so I tell you a little, you remember the first one where he says, he calls us the sons of the sea, and he's going to tell us, you don't know my language, I don't know your language. 1938, that was recorded and only discovered recently by this man, Anthony Trail, who gave permission to use it. And it's an extremely weird story. Linguists were having a conference. It was an international congress of linguists in Belgium in 1938, and they asked colleagues in South Africa to record this language, which they knew was dying out. And why was it dying out? Well, the Bushmen were being hunted. It was a bounty on Bushmen. So what are the anthropologists doing? I mean, you have to think, what is going on? So an anthropologist asked this man if he would, tape his language for this conference, and he explained to him about the conference and so forth. And this man took the opportunity to go on the record to say exactly what was happening. And his level of sophistication, if you like, you don't know my language, and I don't know your language. It's a mutual problem, And then he stuck in that little bit about how he was being persecuted. Help, help, he's sort of the subtext of that. And, they're all dead. And the woman singing the lullaby, and you can just hear her baby. And I always wondered what happened to the baby, because she's the last speaker, the last known speaker of that language, which is why there's no translation. They never got around to it. And then she was the last person, and that's the end of it. And, when a language is lost, you lose a worldview. The way the world is divided up by language is unique to each language. And without that, you don't know how these other people were thinking. And if we don't know how people are thinking, what do we know about them? And one of the problems with globalism is not just I'm interested in new languages growing, Cajun languages is a polyglot languages are fascinating. But really what's happening is that everyone is speaking English. And they're speaking very bad English. And this is the thing that drives me as a native English speaker crazy, because my language is becoming impoverished. I know this through having taught in a very wonderful postgraduate art course in Rotterdam, which is an international course. And there are students from Asia and Latin America and all over Europe and the United States. And it's conducted in English. And they all speak terrible English, and they speak it to each other. And you're supposed to be discussing art on a postgraduate level. And it's impossible. It's simplified beyond belief, and as a result, everyone is talking baby talk about art now. It's true. It's true. And my language is losing out as a native speaker. So you get a slight sense, even though we're the dominant language, you get a slight sense of what it must be like to be losing your language in a much more fundamental way that, you know, if you're in contact, if you're a small culture in contact with a big culture, then gradually you start adopting more and more words from the dominant culture. And pretty soon your own language is down to a few things. And then eventually it doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, you wanted to say some positive things about that. Where's your microphone? I can't hear.
When you correct somebody's language, I mean, how do you maintain a standard in a language as we're going to use it? Listen to television. I think it's actually a very, very important aspect because language developed as a means of communication. And it still is communication, and it is all art. And as English breaks down, it was a language that had traditionally been one that had always very precise and both in structure and in its vocabulary. And I think we are permitting this young generation to get away with murder. And yet every time I bring this up with grandchildren, or it's you know, that's just language has to evolve and it has to keep growing.
Well, that's true. That's true because we have a living language, and it is changing. And as an older person, obviously, I call it baby talk, but that's me. People don't call it baby talk. You know. It's there may be great chunks of English now that I don't even understand. You know, when people say something is bad, they mean it's good. Well, you know. So yeah, that's an insoluble one. But this is a different problem. This piece is looking at a different problem, I think. Yes.
I was really interested to hear you talking early in your lecture about European appropriation and occupation of other art, really sort of pillaging the arts of Oceania and Africa. And then you made a statement that I'd like you to elaborate on, in which you said, if one talks about the other, whatever one says actually says more about oneself than actually about the other. And is there a legitimate way to talk about the other, or is the other an egocentric construct?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the answer to that is, and I don't know quite where to go with that, but it's something I feel strongly about that. I mean, to take a very simple example of presentation of the other, it would be an ethnographic exhibition, an exhibition of ethnographic art or a museum of ethnographic art. And that absolutely tells us nothing. And it tells us nothing about the others. It only tells us about ourselves. And I think we need to be more conscious of that because, you know, the only way to know the other is through becoming at one with the other. I mean, you know, you can't stand at a distance and look at the other. And that's what we do in our society. That is our mode of dominance, actually, is representation. So it's a complicated issue and one that is unacknowledged. You know, so, but you know that, you know. And the thing about appropriation and artistic appropriation, and when I said that, I assume everybody knows all this now, is that, you know, we know that the artists who made things were known and named in Africa, for example, or in Oceania, but they were always presented as anonymous. So when it was anonymous, you could just copy it, or you could do whatever you wanted. And the more I looked at it, with a background as an anthropologist, the more literal the copying became. So there was very little transformation in a great deal of modernist sculpture between what was a product of Paul Klee or Picasso or whatever, and the original African statue that you could locate quite clearly by going to the Museum of Mankind in Paris. You know, you could see where it came from. And nobody likes to say that. I mean, it seems to denigrate what the Western artists were doing. I don't mean it entirely as a denigration. I mean it as a significant act of appropriation, which should be acknowledged as that. And it isn't. You know, people talk, oh, the influence of African art, but they don't talk about it in a precise way. And the artists were pretty precise in their borrowing. Yeah, but you know all that. It's not new news, so. Anybody else?
Hi. You mentioned earlier your use of text, voice, and ritual, and also your use of boxes. All of that,
Boxes, yeah.
a Fluxus artist, and it's really interesting to me because I came from a Fluxus festival in New York, and it was fun and ridiculous, and your work is so serious.
Oh.
But there's an infusion there. What made you take those things that are such a part of the Fluxus tradition and
well,
make
I
them
suppose
serious?
because I thought I was inventing. I started off doing minimalist painting, and then I had a lot of friends who were in Fluxus, and the two things just seemed to be very helpful to me. And then it coincided with conceptualism, and they all sort of merged with my tendency toward a kind of feminist position. And I guess that really does sum up my work. But it's very interesting that you mention Fluxus, because people tend not to give Fluxus the credit as a movement that I think it deserves. Some of my work is a little more lighthearted. I mean, really, this piece you saw now is, of course, not lighthearted, but other things of mine have probably less solemn implications, I think. But I am interested in trying to be serious, particularly about things that no one is very serious about. And or the way that they're serious covers up a deep lack of seriousness. And I would say the constant reiteration of mournfulness about losing languages actually covers up a lack of concern.